Hello. How is everyone? You're up past midnight and you're watching me, so can't be fantastic. What are you watching? That is an excellent question. My sleep schedule is completely off, so I have weird amounts of time at weird times of the day to do things. So I just woke up, as a matter of fact, and it's past midnight, so I figured I'll do something. That is indeed the Anti-Citizen X blog. Apparently he's been talking about pragmatism. And he's an idiot, so I don't know what to expect here. But let's take a look. Blissfully, this one is very short. Okay, so how falsification and pragmatism solve the problem of induction. Imagine a possible world where all swans are white. Take this as a supposition. If all swans are white, then all swans I encounter will be white, because all swans are white, okay? If all swans I encounter are white, then induction says that all swans are white. Therefore, if all swans are white, then induction worked. Right, so if it is true that all swans are white, then induction worked. Now imagine a possible world where not all swans are white. Suppose also that all swans I encounter happen to be white anyway. Bad luck, if all swans I encounter are white, then induction says that all swans are white. Therefore, if not all swans are white, then induction failed. It is false that all swans are white, but induction tells me they are. If not all swans are white, then one of two things can happen. Law of the excluded middle. Don't know why you're specifying that. Every future swan I encounter will be white. Some future swan I encounter will not be white. If one, then I don't care if not all swans are white. Induction is still worked out correctly in every situation that mattered to me. Pragmatism. No, that's wrong. Then oops, I was wrong that all swans are right. Empirical falsification, therefore when induction fails either pragmatism I don't care or falsification. He doesn't know what pragmatism is. Pragmatism is not the idea. I mean, like, in a limited respect, sort of. Like, there's a stupid reading of pragmatism in which this makes sense. But it is a stupid reading of pragmatism. So, the simple way of putting this is, pragmatism is the meanings of terms in language are downstream from their use, right? So it doesn't have to be the case that our language corresponds to some, like, metaphysical truth outside of our experience or beyond itself for it to function as such and for it to have meaning. Now, pragmatically, in a vulgar sense, yeah, it doesn't particularly matter for us practically if every swan we encounter will be white. If indeed, if we make the inference off of experience that every swan in the universe is white, even if there is one somewhere that's not. Now, it actually probably might, if you expanded this example as something a little more, like, substantive, then, you know, it is necessarily the case that a highly contingent biological organism have some quality or other. Like say you're making a similar inference, but about the constancy of time, right? Or some other like natural, some other dimension of existence or whatever. That holds true across all of space. I mean, that could mean something substantial, at the very least for science. But that's he doesn't know what pragmatism is. Like it's called pragmatism, but it doesn't just mean being pragmatic. What it means is like literally pragmatics is what gives rise to meaning. That's all. Oh, thank God that was short. This is not the problem of induction. The problem of induction refers to the impossibility of induction to prove the uniformity principle upon which its use is predicated. Yeah, so he thinks he's sidestepping it, is the point. He's not solving it. He's sidestepping it, saying, fuck, it doesn't matter. It's just lame, though. Says midnight oil, but streams are at 8:30. Well, the difference is I'm on real time, and you're on U time. See, the mistake you're making is I'm the main character here. I need to sleep, but I don't know what to do. You should try to sleep. My recommendation, if you can't sleep, is to try and lie down on a mat or something that's not your bed. Struggle to stay awake with a book or something, and when you can't stand it anymore, go to bed. You've reversed the center of gravity. So he apparently also doesn't know what the problem of induction is. I imagine Anti-Citizen X doesn't know what a lot of things are. That's, say Anti-Citizen X doesn't know and then, like, throw a dart just on like, a wall just covered in sticky notes, and wherever it lands, it'll probably be true. What else can I look at? I don't want to look at anything I'm going to be looking at next week when I'm more awake. Like, I don't want to look at, I guarantee you it's going to be a disaster, but Carefree Wandering has a video on if morality exists, everything is permitted. Oh, it's a Q&A. Why is that a Q&A? Like, it seems like a functionally stupid sentence. Well, whatever. Screw it. Let's look at this thing. Okay, hey, pause. I clicked the button. Stop doing that. God, I can't wait till I upgrade my computer. Okay, let's turn this music off. Let's turn this up. Clarity creates ease? Is he trying to become a guru? What is this?
It's now, I think, more than a year ago that we posted our first videos on this channel. And this was initially because Phi, a producer, suggested I read The Moral Landscape by Sam Harris. And then we posted this video and we got a lot of responses, but we never really got to respond to the responses. So much belated, we're going to do this today. By far the most criticisms by viewers were about a supposed paradox, namely that they said by criticizing morality, by somehow indicating that morality is bad, I was making a moral judgment and thereby contradicting myself. One typical comment here by Nathan Paulson: if you don't believe in morality, then why are social conflict and violence and all the things you criticize moral discourses for a problem? So, once more, let me explain this. I basically agree with Sam Harris that the quest for well-being, both individually and collectively, is an important quest that both the sciences and philosophy can dedicate themselves to. However, I disagree with Sam Harris that this quest is best being described as moral, just as I think it's not best being described as religious. It's simply a quest for well-being. Now, violence,
It's a quest for well-being in a redescriptive sense, as in, like, on analysis, we find that we're actually hunting down well-being, or we are actually just specifically seeking out well-being, because that doesn't seem to me obviously true. You could be seeking like a oblivion or something. You could be seeking something like greatness or whatever that comes to the tremendous cost of well-being.
also can be understood as not primarily immoral or sinful, but as not increasing well-being.
So there's an equivocation here, or an association rather, between immorality and sinfulness. So that's interesting.
For instance, obviously, violence often
Oh, I just noticed Habermas on a shelf back there. Very distinct spine on the back left.
causes bodily pain, it causes mental stress, and it causes social dysfunctionality. The basic idea is, just as we can drop the religious framing of, for instance, violence or anything else that doesn't increase well-being, we can also drop the moral framing of it. Violence is neither against God nor actually against moral principles, but in most cases, it does not increase well-being.
What? Like, just categorically not against moral principles? There are pacifist communities which espouse pacifism as both like a ethical social norm, so in the classical sense of moral, or as an imperative. Wait, are they conflating sin and morality? I've been like consistently disappointed with this guy. I think he might be, but I don't know. Or sorry, conflating sin and immorality, not sin and morality.
Just to give you an example of an amoral conception of goodness. For instance, if a doctor says smoking 20 cigarettes a day is doing violence to yourself and decreases your well-being, therefore you'd be better off if you would smoke less or stop smoking altogether.
That's a figure of speech. They're not. Violence involves a violation generally when you're actually talking about violence properly. It's not just anything involving any sort of biochemical process that you consider to be negative to you. That's not what violence means. Doing violence to just means doing damage to.
If the doctor makes such a statement, she actually neither makes a moral nor a religious statement. And just in the same way, I think we can philosophically emphasize well-being or de-emphasize violence without being moralistic or religious. Nevertheless, people still seem to have, if not a strong religious faith, some form of moral faith. And that seems to be difficult to overcome for viewers like Nathan Paulson, who just cannot see how a defense of amorality isn't moral at the same time. And apparently Sam Harris has exactly the same problem. They just cannot see how a statement against violence is not at the same time also a moral statement. So this shows how powerful still the use of moral language is. I think just as people...
Well, no, I think the point is, if you're just making a blanket statement against violence categorically and sort of like as a universal imperative, then that's really what we're doing when we're saying something is a moral imperative to begin with. That's all the content it bears, is that it obtains immaterially of circumstances. Even if like it implicates specific circumstances in its locution. Like, obviously, if you're in a Robinson Crusoe situation, there's no other people around, don't commit murder as like a general statement. It's dormant. Like, it implicates a specific scenario in which you have the capacity to commit murder. You don't require the constant opportunity to break a moral maxim, say, in order for it to obtain.
who grow up in a highly religious environment find it very difficult to understand anything without relating it to God. We, growing up in a heavily moralistic environment,
That's not true.
find it difficult to understand anything, or a lot of things at least, without seeing them in a moral register. I like the following
Good morning, Dietrich.
comment by Zachary Hirschberger, which I think describes the form of relief you can experience once you somehow free yourself from overly religious or overly moralistic frameworks. I like to quote Zachary here. It's the specific contradiction that drove me out of religion. God and morality were too fixed and immediate. Nothing I did mattered or could even matter. I was so young it produced a traumatic impression, but I've learned a lot in overcoming it. Reading philosophy was instrumental in bringing me to a healthy mental state and eradicating the eternal no, as Nietzsche called it.
But then why do you require what you do? Maybe I'm missing context here, but it doesn't seem to me like you're really overcoming that if you're concerned about whether something you do matters beyond your preference that it be. Yeah?
So again, I think he describes wonderfully here what happens when we no longer see everything and judge everything, or at least a lot of things, in terms of their religious or moral value or meaning.
Does he think religion and morals are two sides of the same coin? Yeah. You know what it is? I don't know why on earth. I mean, I have a sense as to why. But people who emphasize Eastern religion as a category, or Eastern philosophy, quote unquote, there is a strong tendency to allow them to operate with a lower degree of rigor, because the reason why they're there is perversely for the Orientalist novelty of them being so, and not because of a serious attempt to integrate them with actual, like, with philosophy proper. Because philosophy is an endeavor, right? It's a vocation. It's an activity. It's not a genre of literature. That's not really what we're talking about when we talk about philosophy. They're like philosophical works that are specifically designed and written for the purpose of advancing that vocation and for assisting it and for, like, helping us do things in it that we couldn't do without the contents of them. But specifically, it's an activity of trying to. I mean, it's equivalent to science in a lot of ways, until you get to our really reductionistic use of science today. It's called the science of logic for a reason. He had an okay video, which I'm gonna second guess. I'm not entirely sure it was okay. I think I might have had a little bit of a bias there. I had some issues with Philosophy 2 being similarly sloppy, a lot of stuff. She's gotten better. But he had a video critiquing her for commodifying philosophy. Granted, this is what he is doing. He conspicuously fronted... oh my god, Dietrich, that is crazy generous. Thank you very much. I will never sleep again. Thank you very much for the $50. Damn. You just paid my phone bill this month. Great. Sorry, as I was saying. I'll cut that out. It's gonna be weird. I will say thank you though. What's be gentle to redhead Bryan Cranston. I don't hate the guy, but he's doing something just extraordinarily irresponsible here. Back to the point I was making. It rubbed me the wrong way, and I didn't comment on it at the time because I was like, oh, she transitioned already. This is just her now. But it was weird how he was like putting forward her profile, like the sort of beauty shot she had with like the new makeup and everything when she had just come out as a woman. That was weird, and it felt like there is an element that I dislike about the way in which let me put it this way. I don't like that perspective philosophy's persona is it's not perspective philosophy, philosophy tube's persona um, is put forward as effectively um, a cover for actual philosophical depth. Like she tries to cultivate a the likability of her person as kind of a like that's really the product. The philosophy part is not. Now to her credit, I have much less of an issue with that recently because she has gotten considerably better. I don't know what it is. I don't know if she's uh, working in concert with other people so she can have like more robust scripts that are like edited and have like multiple people's feedback going into it, which is great if that's the case. Um, Maybe she's just actually getting better read. Maybe I'm being more generous just because I'm starting to recognize like how brutally exhausting this is. Um, but like I'm not a massive fan of that kind of parasociality. I guess I am tired. Parasociality acting as a surrogate for like actual rigor. That being said, when I reflect on this, like, what is he doing here? Like, I mean, he's doing precisely the same thing. Like, he's using his position as a professor in particular in front of his bookshelf, like I do. I'm not a professor. In front of his bookshelf to, reassure you that this is coming from a position of extensive training and knowledge and care. But he's not really giving you that, and he's going way far outside of his realm of competence. I'm in political science. I shouldn't be able to like recognize holes in things this easily with someone quite possibly double my age in a completely different discipline, and yet I can. And it's frustrating because there's no excuse for it. Plus, like there's a big market for the stuff that he does do well. Like he, um, Carefree Wandering. What's his name again? It's Hans Georg Muller, or Mueller? Muller? I think it's Muller. Hans. Hans could do like stuff that's in his wheelhouse really really well. And I'm looking at the back here. I see a oh, that's a cool book. That purple book, sort of a little bit on the opposite the Habermas book on the far left. The Taoist Body. I'm a little bit curious about that one. I'd like to spend a couple days at some point when I have breathing room to actually go over the Tao Te Ching and sort of political writings associated with that, because there's a lot that's interesting there. I'm reading a book on my Kindle right now on Japanese political philosophy that's really interesting from the interwar period. Not their interwar period, our interwar period. Actually, Japan wasn't in World War One, were they? Hang on, give me a sec. My brain is shot. Nope, nope, they totally did. They were in World War One. From 1914 to 1918, in alliance with Entente powers, and played an important role in securing the sea lanes in the West Pacific and Indian Oceans against the Imperial German Navy. As a member of the Allies politically, the Japanese Empire seized the opportunity to expand its sphere of influence in China and to gain recognition as a great power in post-war geopolitics. Cool. Well, not that cool, but interesting.
And how in this way we somehow overcome moral faith. And I think that we've actually existing amorally in a lot of social contexts. For instance, we no longer apply religion or moral faith in, I already referred to this example, in medicine, right? We no longer see people who are sick either as being punished by God or as somehow morally responsible for their sickness. Similarly, and I gave this.
I don't think we generally universally regarded, by we I mean, like, I guess, like, medieval and ancient Christians or something, or Jews or Greeks or whatever. It's not universally being punished by God. Sometimes it's I mean, like, there's no reference, as far as I'm aware, to the plague in Athens, for example, recorded in Thucydides as being the interference of a god. I'm sure some people did link that, but I don't think there's anything sort of like that's not blanketly the case. Off topic, President Sunday. What are your thoughts on Bertrand Russell? I haven't read a lot of Bertrand Russell. Besides like the stuff we covered years and years and years ago when we were talking about, nuclear deterrence in like first year intro to political science courses. Um, that'd be interesting to investigate in and of itself. Like the notion that America rather, as a Canadian, I keep referring to America as we because inferiority complex and all that. Um, that his arguments that America needs to engage in a preemptive nuclear strike to ward off an imminent global nuclear holocaust obviously was not borne out or has not been borne out yet. I mean, he could still be proved right at some point. But no worries, Dietrich. I wasn't getting that impression. I don't think you'd pay me off for that anyways. Although keep it up might work. Um yeah, I'll have to I'll address that at some point. There's so much I want to address. It just takes so much time. Really, I was going to spend tonight reading, and I just couldn't. I was just too tired. Couldn't focus on the page. My eyes were tired. Even today, like I didn't mention this on stream, or I may have. When I went into the lobby before the stream started on like, can we escape the state? I rallied about midway through, but I was like, guys, I got to level with you. I was up till like 5 last night working on a graphics project. I'm barely here, so you might have to carry this. They didn't have to, thank God. But is America actually superior? In what sense? I mean, like militarily, it seems to be. I don't know who would contest at this point. If you mean morally superior, I don't. It depends on what you're comparing it to. It's definitely not the best there is. And it's too big a place and too various to really characterize with one, blanket description. I'm gonna go refill my cider. I'll be right back. I mean, it would be interesting to investigate his views on deterrence because those are interesting in themselves. Um, the sort of naive willingness to take the playing out of a simulation. In this case, really just the principle of deterrence by itself. Um, or the principle of mutually assured destruction, rather, not deterrence. I mean, deterrence is something else, but mutually assured destruction. Because, like, mutually assured destruction doesn't necessarily imply deterrence, right? Mutually assured destruction is like the stick. that keeps you in line. Was this window always here? What are we talking about? Not always. But yeah, I need to figure out what's going on with that debate with Waluka, and I have to prep for that at some point. It's been a big push week. Next week will be easier because it's a lot of Mr. Girl stuff. So we'll still have political streams. We'll probably actually have a few more of them next week, just because I'll be able to be a little bit more fast and loose with what I cover. I know Bunny Tooth wants to do more Dune after tomorrow, so that'll be good. I can't stand Dune. I want to like Dune. And I actually do in small doses, but very small doses. I just find it so oppressingly overwritten. Not even in terms of prose, like that's fine. Just in terms of like you spend so much time with Paul and it's tedious. I have to get some water. What is going on with my throat? Give me a moment. Sorry. I'm pulling a Haas here. Need to place some. Actually, I'm going to do that. Screw it. I'm not above this. Let's see. Oh god, that's loud. Okay, let's get a little bit quieter. There we go. Okay, I'll be right back. The pollen must be bad today. What are we at? Only moderate, huh? Just a spit in my face. Well, let's keep going with this monstrosity.
Example in the first video on Harris in education. We also no longer treat bad students as bad people. In the economy too, we, at least more often than not, I hope, also do not view poor people as morally bad. And at least hopefully in politics too, we are capable of seeing the political opponents not as morally bad, but just as maybe politically bad. Unfortunately, of course, a lot of problems arise when, for instance, in politics, we switch to a moral coding of political differences. Even in law, I think there is a tendency to move away from moral coding, from moral...
That's silly. One of the best wards you can have against the dissolution of a political community from the inside is blanket moral condemnation for specific political moves. Like anti-democratic sentiment, for example. It's not that it's cosmically right to do so, but it's a massive protection. If you are a bad person for being against your neighbors having a say in what your community does and how it decides on the course of its future, that in itself stands as a protection for those people continuing to have a say for their political freedom.
Moral language from moral framing. And I mentioned the case of divorce law, where we also no longer try to find out which of the two partners is guilty.
That is not true.
With regard to the breakdown of the relationship. So thereby, I'd like to contradict.
That's not true. And not only is that not true, I think there's actually an element of that that's actually kind of bad. When you're in a married relationship, your assets are pooled. You become psychologically and materially dependent on each other. And depending on how and when and even why a relationship is broken off, that can condition how much damage is done to the other party and how much culpability one other party has. I think it should be treated with a lot more gravity than it is. But he's also incorrect that it is not the case that there's simply, like, legally, divorce can be no fault, but at the same time, you can sue for damages if it's done in certain ways. It's very difficult to do, but it can be done.
One viewer, Andrew Knopp, who writes, and this fact, I believe, is that morality and moralizing is an essential function of human nature. I don't agree. It is still very common for humans to moralize.
Depending on where you are, I should probably specify. Where is he actually? He's not in America. He's in isn't he in China? University of Macau.
And everyone does it, including myself. But I doubt that it is an essential function of human nature and that it is essential also for social functioning. Some viewers also shared their own amoral preferences, and I'd like to quote one here. Mac W. writes, there are a lot of normative claims that I would consider to be amoral, like the Beatles are better than the Rolling Stones. I think it depends on whether or not the claim is making value judgments that are connected to principles about what behaviors or practices, policies are right and wrong. Someone who says the Beatles are better than the Rolling Stones is implying that they believe the Beatles' music has more value in some way, but they're not implying that you would be doing something wrong or harmful or unsacred by enjoying the Rolling Stones more. Yes, I couldn't agree more, and I think we can extend this very statement to other areas that I just talked about, such as medicine, law, politics, education, and so forth. Not beating children is educationally better than beating children. I think this can probably be empirically proven. But this does not...
Well, I mean, depending on what you're educating them into, right? Like, you're producing a particular kind of subject. The success of an education depends on whether or not you manage to produce that kind of subject or that kind of individual or whatever. Like, you remember the opening sequence of Brave New World, where they are showing how all of the different classes of humanity, what is it, the state of our Ford or something, the Ford state? I can't remember what it's called, but they're giving a tour of the facility that clones the people, or I guess incubates the people who are going to be populating the city afterwards. And they have, like, alcohol introduced into their systems while they're still fetuses to limit their capacities. They are conditioned to prefer certain vocations. One of the things that happens is babies are placed into a kind of synthetic nature scenario. And to the end of acclimating them to prefer an urban setting, as they approach, like, nature scenes, like butterflies and trees and flowers and things, they're electroshocked. So they permanently associate that with discomfort. It's one of the more morbid things I've read. But the success of that education, because that's what that is, it's going to be different than this guy's notion of what a successful education is, which is good. I think he's got a better notion of education than that, but you know what I mean.
Entail the claim that this is so because beating others is a sin or a violation of a specific moral principle. So this brings us to another question by Mark LeBay. Mark writes, if there is a science of health, why can't there also be a science of morality? I think that is the chief question to address, specifically with respect to Sam Harris. I agree, that's an important question to address, and I think it can be answered rather simply. Well, medicine, for instance, exists because bodies exist and the mind exists, and therefore we also have something like mental health.
Not if you read Richard Rorty, is that obvious?
Social sciences, for instance, exist, like whatever, economics, political science, law.
Just the short of that is, in Rorty's philosophy in the Mirror of Nature, he contends that the mental or the mind as a specific category of thing is downstream from discourse and not something that's necessarily like true. It's not necessarily the case that there is a cosmic distinction or like a metaphysical distinction between our interiority and the world outside.
Law studies, because actually society exists, right? There is an economy, there's politics, there's law. Natural science exists because nature exists, right? Chemistry exists because chemical elements and so forth exist. Then history, sociology, psychology of religion exists because religion also exists. But, and this is the important point, theology is not really a science in this way, because actually, I'm pretty sure God does not exist. And similarly, very similarly, I think also moral science.
That's stupid. That's really stupid. Richard Rorty doesn't believe that the mind as such is a distinct category of being. Like mind stuff is a distinct category of being. Does that therefore mean, from his vantage, that the investigation into the thinking that God doesn't exist doesn't make something not a science, or thinking that the object of a science doesn't exist doesn't make it not a science. Science is an activity. It's not it's defined by what it does, not necessarily just by its goal. Like we can talk about science in sort of a primitive sense where we have like, because of course like science is one of those weird things that changes itself as it grows, as it develops. Because what we understand science to be, like the what we understand, like trying to get knowledge about the world, is conditioned by our growing knowledge of what knowledge is, and of what the world is, and all those different things, and of the development of method. Um, I mean, what is even meant by God here? I don't know. It's just, I don't think theology is a science, by the way, but that's beside the point. Not in the sense that he's talking about it, anyways. It can be a science. Um, like it can be a scientific inquiry into whether or not such and such a thing as that is either coherent conceptually or consistent with what we know about the world, or whether it's true or not. Having a predilection to one outcome or the other does not change a venture from being scientific. I don't think it's scientific because I don't think it's approached scientifically, judging from what I've seen. But that's entirely beside the point.
Does not exist because moral principles, unlike principles in physics, for instance, do not really exist. So I think there can very well be something like a history, a sociology, a psychology of morality. And this can be somehow a science of morality.
Okay, there's something I want to watch that's completely off topic, and it's so much more interesting than this, and we're just gonna do it. We're just gonna do it. It's a fuck it. It's 1:30 a.m. I'm just doing the cringe thing. We're just watching this video essay on real philosophy on Miyazaki, the director of FromSoft, on Sekiro, on immortality, stagnation, and corruption. Because this stuff just, it's so good. Bennu in Space says, part of me thinks we need to ignore the threat of nuclear war and just stop Russia. The mass graves are really upsetting. That's the question, though. If it ends up resulting in nuclear war, or if it ends up resulting in any kind of escalation of conflict between great powers, which decreasingly Russia seems to be, then if you have, if you share, as you seem to, my dislike for the existence of mass graves, it's none of us have godlike power to just kind of arrest these things, right? Like, we can't just freeze Russia, no matter how much military power you have. Frankly, yeah, it's a mess.
Hello,
Oh god, that was freaking loud. What the hell? So sorry about that. Okay, here we go.
scholars! In this video, we'll be discussing one of Miyazaki's most common themes, that is, immortality and the corruptive stagnation that brings. This theme appears in all the Dark Souls games, Derasane, Bloodborne, and now in Sekiro as well. So it's clearly an important part of Miyazaki's philosophy, but something we don't touch too deeply on in the lore community, so maybe this video can change that a little bit. As many other scholars have pointed out, in Japanese culture, stagnant bodies of water are considered sources of uncleanliness. Because a stagnant pond, or lake, or puddle, mosquitoes can safely lay their eggs in that water. Those same insects can't do that in a running river because the eggs just get washed away. In Sekiro, there are several references to stagnant blood.
Repeated use leads to stagnation. This causes those who do not have the power to become sick. A disease known as dragon rot. Blood that he's coughed up. The color of the blood itself appears to be tainted, stagnant.
And Lord Kuro, who is immortal, talks about his blood being stagnant too.
Undying begets stagnation. The immortal oath, the rejuvenating waters, the dragon rot. They all corrupt men, to the point that they no longer live as men.
But my lord, you cannot bleed.
Yes, it is true that those of the dragon's heritage cannot bleed.
With the mortal blade, you may wound the divine heir, and his blood will be allowed to flow.
So the mortal blade will allow my blood to flow.
In other words, his blood is stagnant because of his immortality. And because their blood isn't flowing and it's stagnant, that allows these parasites to kind of breed inside of their bodies and then sort of like take them over.
From what I've read and what I've been listening to lately, and I think Sinclair Lore goes into this a little bit too. I found them really interesting. Sinclair Lore is actually a really cool channel. They do like a lot of FromSoft lore and stuff like that, but they're actually very well read on this stuff, or at least some of them are, and the rest of them who aren't are just very pleasant people to listen to. But I know Sophie is a sociologist. There's a few interesting people. But I remember them going into this a little bit. There's a very strong dichotomy that's really emphasized in a lot of a strong cultural dichotomy between the corrupting forces of nature and like the rot that attends any place that's sort of left unkept. And the habitable human space of like what we would call civilization or something. And one of the like the ubiquity of, for example, besides them being like really scary, the ubiquity of centipedes as a symbol or an embodiment of what we might call evil in a lot of like Japanese art and in anime and gaming and all that stuff, comes from their association with, like, because centipedes are creatures that scurry around in undergrowth, like where leaf and decay pile up, things like that. There'll be more of that than here as it goes on, but of course, like stagnation, right? Like if you don't constantly sweep and dust your house, it decays. Oh, Sekiro is really good. It's beautiful. I think it's actually the best FromSoft game. The combat annoys the hell out of me. I'm just bad at it, but it also annoys me. But just the world design.
Just as mosquitoes lay their eggs in a stagnant pond, the parasites in Sekiro lay their eggs inside of immortal individuals with stagnant blood, Or, more oddly in the shinobi's case, he himself is like a parasite. His immortality saps the life force from other individuals, and it's those people the shinobi has met who become corrupted and whose blood begins to stagnate.
Oh, I just noticed this. Look at this. Look closely at this guy's robes. Look really here. I'll zoom it in so you can see. Look at the look at this, the red lines on this guy's robes. Watch them carefully.
And it's those people the shinobi has met who become corrupted and whose blood begins to stagnate.
Oh my god.
And it's all
The detail. I didn't even notice that before.
also kind of like a metaphor. Time is stagnant for someone who is immortal. Their blood stops flowing and stagnates, so that makes them the perfect host for these centipedal parasites to nest in, lay their eggs, breed in, and eventually take over the host's body and corrupt his identity and even implant in him an endless desire for more and more of the thing that brought about his own stagnation. The parasite is not the cause of the immortality, but it is instead a symptom of it and the source of that corruption and insanity and addiction. So Sekiro has really altered my view on Bloodborne, where now I think I understand where the vermin come from and how they corrupt people's identities and take control of them. People really sympathize with Gilbert, but in truth, his quest...
What he's talking about here, vermin. I don't know what they're talking about here. What vermin are in Bloodborne is this item. I haven't played Bloodborne, but I've watched a lot of playthroughs. This item you pick up from killing certain enemies. It's in their blood, and it appears only like when you have like... It's like implied that you need to be mad to see them. But it's like little centipede-like creatures that are in the blood. And it's implied that this is sort of like the essence of, this is where the Plague of the Beast comes from.
To extend his life with immortal blood is as corrupt as Genichiro's quest for immortal blood to extend the life of his doomed nation. That obsession with clinging to the past and never letting go is an immoral quest, and even Robert's father, who seeks to extend the life of his ill son, is immoral. Were he to succeed and feed the divine immortal water to his son, it would only corrupt his son, stagnate his blood, and his son would lose his autonomy and sense of self. One of my friends was criticizing really the moral message in Sekiro that, immortality is this futile pursuit. He criticized that as kind of being unrelatable. Like, okay, thank you, Miyazaki. I guess I'll stop trying to pursue immortality now, because otherwise I'll get taken over by a parasite or something. But I think that's kind of missing the point. I think it has more to do with, like, a very harsh lesson that the Japanese people learned from their own history. During Japan's Sengoku period, regional leaders, or daimyo, were constantly fighting each other to take over their neighbor's territory. Sekiro hypothetically takes place during this chaotic period of Japanese history, with a few artistic liberties given.
The stages of the game will also be based on famous battles which actually took place in ancient Japan. So here's this giant enemy crab.
Immediately following the Sengoku era was a long period known as the Great Peace, or Edo period, which lasted for nearly 250 years. During this time, Japan kind of unified under the rulership of the Tokugawa clan, and most importantly, Japan adopted a policy of isolation, or sakoku, where any foreigner, save for a few exceptions, who tried to set foot in Japan would be executed. This was in reaction to the reality of European religion and expansion, which threatened to destroy Japan's self-sovereignty. So keep this in mind, Japan was attempting to cling onto and preserve its old traditions by forbidding Western ideas, technology, and development. And this worked very, very well for hundreds of years. A Dutch trader who was given special exemption said in 1621, "Edo is on most days more crowded than a public street in any of the most populous towns of Europe."
Thus began the Age of Fire.
So Japan's Edo period was unusually peaceful, ludicrously economically prosperous, the culture thrived, and the population and urban development of Japan boomed like never before. However, the consequence of Sakoku became apparent in 1853 when Commodore Matthew Perry of the U.S. Navy arrived in Japan with 4 technologically advanced warships. In pursuit of Japan's coal and whale oil, he demanded that Japan open its ports for trade, and when he returned in 1854 with a fleet that dwarfed the previous, the shogun of Japan had little other choice than to capitulate. Other nations, including Britain, France, the Netherlands, and Russia, also made their own demands of the Japanese people, and the treaties the shogun was forced to sign, such as the Treaty of Kanagawa, were usually kind of unfair and unfavorable to the Japanese nation. It humiliated the Japanese people, threatened their sovereignty, and ultimately ended Japan's peaceful Edo period. I don't know. In an attempt to rival these Western nations and regain a competitive edge, An alliance of samurai overthrew the old shogunate and established the Meiji Restoration in an attempt to westernize Japan itself. The entire class structure was reorganized.
By the way, side note, that used to bug me when I was a kid, like that bald look where it's like, oh, all the way back. I don't get why people are down on Haas for having like a super high hairline. I don't get why that's a thing anyways. Like it's funny when they make it important about themselves and they carry water for like a murderous regime in the process of killing children and civilians. But like, you know what I like about Invincible? And what I like about a lot of media recently is they've started moving away from like model appearances, and they've started emphasizing things like, you know, like signs of experience and grit and like contents under pressure and stress as like elements of people who do stuff, right? Like the coolest character in Invincible is Cecil. Like I love that character so much. He's like got weird Mr. Burns hair going on, like long almost at the back of his head. He's got like scars going down his face. Like the guy looks like he's been through shit and he looks deeply tired and unhappy. But he's like that scene where he's talking to Omni-Man and he's sort of interrogating him and he's like pressing the button and teleporting around him. Omni-Man like moves at the speed of sound almost. He's not reacting to Omni-Man's movements. He's literally just randomly timing when he's going to teleport to guess, to sort of preempt when Omni-Man's going to like make an attack on him so he's safe. And you know this because he teleports around even when Omni-Man isn't throwing stuff at him. And like I like that. I like putting characters like that back as protagonists because like I don't know, we have a weird horror of age in our culture. Like a weird horror of it. Like we consider people once they get to a certain like point of old age as being like in some sense unworthy of being like the main character of some story or other, or of being some active agent. They become like a thing that the real people deal with and account for. But that's really not the case. Some of the most badass and important people that exist look like that. They look old and wrinkly and homely and like coarsened and tired and stressed and sort of faded, but they're defined by their action and their like their character and their intensity and things of that sort. Like I don't know. Like I feel like that's kind of worth owning. You know? Coolest character in Lost is John Locke or Benjamin Linus or whatnot. Like not hyper attractive people conventionally. I guess John Locke's kind of good looking. Not my type, but good looking. Who else? I mean, Tyrion Lannister is an obvious one, but Tywin Lannister is one. There's a cut scene from Game of Thrones where Tywin Lannister is fishing and Pycelle, I think his name is, the Grand Meister, like the potions guy. He approaches him. He's like stammering. He's playing like the doddering old fool act still, and then Tywin's like enough. Like I can't be the only person who falls for this. And then Pycelle straightens up. He's like, yes, there are times I believe that myself, and I like that. It dignified the character. Not that he deserved to be dignified. He was a piece of shit, but you know what I mean. Yeah. I don't know. I just think it's important that not just that we avoid overemphasizing superficial aspects of people's characters as being, you know, like that which centers them as the most important or the least important figure. But in addition to that, that we not artificially downgrade the marks of the physical marks of actually being important. Like, there is a reason why people in the office of the President of the United States age like 20 years and 5. And here's the thing too, like, think about it logically. I have a professor. In fact, Robert Walker. This is Inside Outside International Relations as Political Theory. I actually took the last seminar he gave on international relations as political theory. I should have gotten him to sign this book. I didn't. But I was thinking about this the other day. Like, this is a man in his 70s. He has almost like a Cecil look in a way. Like, his hair is all there. He's more of a hairline than I do. Thank God. I'm actually like, I'm scared sometimes because I'm like, oh my God, it's all. And then I look at my baby picture like, oh, I've just always had a weird shaped head. I'd own it though if that happened. Honestly, like I'm not particularly cared about it. I'd probably just like shave it all off if it came to it. If I'm gonna be honest, I don't think I'd do like the whole like kind of thing, but I wouldn't particularly care. But this guy's like plus 70 years in his lifetime. And he's spry, by the way. Like, it was weird. Like, he's a really slender guy. It's kind of like spidery in a cool way. But spry. Like, he walks in head held high, like, with a stride. I've actually, like, I've absorbed a mannerism from him. Every time he would enter a room or a classroom, he'd just come in with his jacket, be like, hello. And I do that now just sort of reflexively. I don't know why. I guess I just liked it, and I just started doing that at one point. Now it's second nature. But like plus 7 years old, my father died at 49. And I think to myself, like, wow. My dad was born, grew to adulthood, raised me. I became fully educated in a span of time that this person may live yet again. Like, I have no primacy here just because I'm younger. That does not make any sense. Yeah, the worship of youth is stupid. Why? Because youths are stupid. Not only that, but like, there's a reason why there's a fetish for people who are older, and I don't think it's just because people just really like wrinkles that much. I think it's because intelligence and character and experience are in themselves inherently attractive. In fact, it might even be one of the that's one of the most disturbing things about like ephebophiles and pedophiles and people like Mr. Girl and whatnot, because it's not the attraction to characteristics, because he's right on one point. Characteristics that are often associated with youth are also often associated with beauty. So smooth skin, slenderness, etc., etc. Not all the time. Everybody's different, but a lot of the time. The disturbing thing is this: if you presented me with a picture of like a conventionally 10 out of 10 individual, I know that kind of language is gross, but you know what I mean, like supermodel level, had the appearance of like the most attractive 25-year-old you've ever seen. However, you informed me that this person actually had like a weird condition that caused them to grow efficiently, and they were in fact half that age. I would lose interest. Like, it would cease to be attractive to me. There are people for whom that is not a factor, or for whom that's a site of appeal. And that's deeply disturbing. And I think the reason why ultimately it's really deeply disturbing, it's not the inherent grossness of being attracted to the features, because again, like, there are people who are 30 years old who resemble like 16-year-olds. Like, that's a thing. There are people who are just very short, very slim, and they don't develop, they look very youthful later on in life. That's not a factor. That's not the issue. The issue is it's an attraction to vulnerability and naivety associated with a lack of experience and agency developed through experience. That, I think, is the primary thing. And people really like a lot of people like older people who are still like physically attractive in certain ways, because they embody the opposite of that. they embody like experience and deliberation and like a seasoned sense of knowledge about what they're doing, not just physically but also emotionally. Know what I mean? Now on the total flip side of that, you have like uh, Johnny Travolta's Grease, where you have high school students who easily look like they're 35. It's just like just make it, change the setting to college or something. Like that's fine. You see people like that all the time. But oh, man, you know what I mean? Yeah, like what about if you met a supermodel who had who was functioning at the level of a young child? Yeah, yeah, it's gross. It's gross immediately. It has nothing to do with the physicality. Nothing at all. There are people of all shapes and sizes. There are people who develop early and look like full adults when they're too young, or when they're not too young, but when they're much younger. And there are people who, you know, they're like women, say, who are flat-chested and short and like sort of youthful looking, but they can be like 30 years old. Like it doesn't make their partners pedophiles for being attracted to them. The point is really the psychology of it. I think that's the crucial issue. Now that being said, if you're in a social situation in which those features should clue you in that you should check something first, then it's a different story. Like for example, if somebody with like the appearance of like someone in their mid to late teens, but nonetheless like gets out of a vehicle or demonstrates or like has like some position in a company or something that indicates, that codes them as being older than they appear, just if you were like lining them up with other people on a wall, then that's one thing, and you know, you'd still want to do your due diligence, of course, if it was very ambiguous. But you wouldn't make the same kind of judgment on a schoolyard, right? Obviously, this conversation is making me feel gross. Well, we're going to move on from this, but you get the point. I don't understand people who are solely attracted to the plastic. We've all seen attractive people who become really boring once they open their mouth, right? I think if you're really boring yourself, if you're a really shallow, uninteresting, underdeveloped person of low character, that kind of thing is appealing because it gives you a feeling of strength. I conjecture. I find that gross. I like personally, I prefer people who challenge me in some way. I definitely don't like people I can run roughshod over. That's actually like a major, like for me personally, I don't understand how someone like Mr. Girl gets on with a partner he can just scream at. I don't want to get too personal about that, but like that's that is probably the thing about him that viscerally repulses me the most. Everything else aside, it's the undercurrent of not even misogyny by itself. It's the undercurrent of a preference for just the weak and the malleable as like his ideal company. That I don't like that at all. I don't like that one bit. Creeps me the fuck out. Which is not making a statement about his partner being weak, just to be clear. It's something I perceive about his attitude, though.
Organized. Military recruitment was opened up to peasants, foreigners were invited to teach at Tokyo University, the military adopted Western technology and strategy, and Japan began to expand its territorial empire across the Pacific and parts of East.
It's not strictly about intelligence, though. If you want to feel uncomfortable, YouTube the trailer for I Am Shonere. I'd rather not. I don't really want to feel uncomfortable right now.
Asia.
I'm
Again,
uncomfortable
this was
enough.
all in an attempt to rival the massive and powerful empires of Britain, France, and Russia. And the national slogan during this time said,
追いつけ、追い越せ。
or catch up, overtake. Japan's aggressive expansion and rapid development solidified it as a considerable world power until 1941, when the nation attacked the American military base at Pearl Harbor, which prompted retaliation by American forces. And in August of 1945, 2 atomic bombs were dropped, one in Hiroshima, which killed 80,000 people, and another one in Nagasaki, which killed another 40,000.
Oh, and Mr. Girl's assumption that all men are that way? I don't think Mr. Girl really assumes that all men are that way. I think Mr. Girl needs to assume that all men are that way in order to feel good about himself. Okay, enough about Mr. Girl. We're watching Sekiro. That's a myth, by the way. The bodies were burned, but I don't think they actually just disappeared. Not like that. Oh, they might have. I thought I read something somewhere that that wasn't the case. Hang on. 2 nukes. Vaporized bodies. Yeah, it'd be like an instant cremation. But it's not like they just disappear, like you turn to ash. There's a book that I know he's not the most reliable source in the world, but he's got it. He has good bibliographies. That Hardcore History Dan Carlin cites that gives a report of some of the people who were like who survived the blast, and they talk about what people who were protected from the blast saw of people who weren't. Like it depicts one woman and her sister in their home. The sister is at the sink doing the dishes or something like that, with a window in front. So she wasn't shielded at all, and it had just basically scoured the skin off of her body. So. People have like this weird notion of nuclear weapons as being unprecedentedly destructive, but also painless. Maybe if you're at the epicenter, but they are not. They're one of the most, like when we think of a nuclear holocaust, we think of like, oh, it's just the bombs fly. Everyone who's like, you think Fallout logic, right? Everyone who's on the surface or near the bombs, they're dead, and everybody else is like, they're safe. But no. I think it's underplayed how extreme that social injury was to Japan. It's not just a social injury. Like, imagine what that does to you psychologically on a personal level. And now you're raising children, and that's influencing that's influencing how you know your mental health and how you relate to your kids, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's gonna do things. Make no mistake, by the way, we had the logic of deterrence before we deployed the first nuclear bomb. For America, deployed the first nuclear bomb. I haven't played Sekiro, always seem like the odd ones out in the Souls games. I actually think it's the most thematically rich of the Souls games, and it has everything. Like it's actually less. Weirdly, Bloodborne is deceptively European when in fact it's way more Japanese than you might think, as is Dark Souls, Demon Souls. Demon Souls is more Japanese, but it's mostly European in terms of its outward aesthetics. King's Field even. But it's subtle. Like it's sort of Japanese in the sense that Lord of the Rings is Catholic, if that makes sense. Heavy presence of themes of purification, stagnation, all that stuff that we're seeing here, things like that. Sekiro, by contrast, has a lot in it that rings more of like Senpou Temple. Senpou Temple has a Faustian element to it that's really interesting. It's not something that you really see in Japanese fiction or Japanese literature until very recently. The kind of deal with otherworldly corrupting powers to prolong life with biological manifestations of corruption resulting, but nonetheless, like Senpou Temple in Sekiro. The premise behind Senpou Temple, and he'll go into this here, is there were these Buddhist monks. They had a temple in Senpou, who, because, do I have to get into the whole thing, don't I? Okay, long story short, 4 reasons they learn an association between becoming physically infested with centipedes and a kind of immortality, a kind of imitation of immortality that that other characters have differently. You have sort of and they start to take on like characteristics of centipedes themselves, or like some of the monks are meditating, they have giant centipedes coiled around them, and of course you saw the high priest, and he has them crawling all over his body, like they're actually infested. It's like a Shadow over Innsmouth type thing going on.
の体制また我に出あらずしかのみならず敵は新たに残虐なる爆弾を使用して地形に向こうを殺傷し3階の及ぶところ真にかかるべか当たるに至る。しかもなお応戦を継続せんかついに我が民族の滅亡を将来するのみならずひいて人類の文明をも破却すべし核の分馬真何を
The Emperor of Japan surrendered, his empire was dismantled, his military was largely disbanded, and he was forced to renounce his godlike divinity, as Japanese culture had believed the emperor was a divine figure.
And he was forced to stand with a man whose pants went up to his chest. Dear God, how tall is this guy?
For 200 years, Japan chose to cling onto the past, and while it was beneficial for a time, it caused the nation to stagnate, while other nations were industrializing. When the time came to confront the industrialized nations of the West, Japan was unprepared and desperately struggled to catch up both technologically and territorially. Ultimately, its self-imposed disadvantage proved to be its undoing.
But soon the flames will fade, and only dark will remain. Even now, there are only embers, and man sees not light, but only endless nights. And amongst the living are seen...
I don't like this. This is tasteless. I don't like the use of actual like footage of people suffering for this thing. Like I get the point, but like I'll have to think about this. I don't know if that's educational or I mean it is educational, it's important, but like the juxtaposition of video game footage with that, I'm not a fan of. It's a very well made video essay. I'm not like prudish about this kind of thing, but you know. I don't know, that rubs me the wrong way.
Now this has all been a particularly harsh lesson for the Japanese people, so when Miyazaki places such a heavy emphasis on the corruptive power of the futile pursuit of immortality, of clinging to the past, of trying to keep things the way they are, it's just a reiteration of what the Japanese people already know firsthand. Technologically superior Americans forced Japan to open its ports in 1854, and technologically superior Americans forced Japan to surrender in 1945. So it's hardly a surprise that post-war Japan strives even harder than ever to become a great nation, not through empire building or military prowess, but through an enormous emphasis on education, innovation, and workplace productivity. Japanese schools are notoriously strict and academically demanding on their students. And even upon graduating, the Japanese workforce is so notoriously productive and work-focused that the nation is suffering a sexless epidemic where people just aren't behaving romantically or sexually with each other. In the past 10 years, Japan's population has declined by 1 million, and to make matters even worse, suicide rates are absurdly high, and heart attacks have become a medical anomaly for how they've affected Japanese young people at impossibly young ages.
Straight out of college in 2009, his son Satoshi proudly joined a prestigious manufacturer. But within a year, he was dead. Investigators said the stress of working extreme hours drove him to take...
Actually, I'm a little bit curious about these numbers. So nearly 2,000 work-related suicides in 2016. How many work-related suicides in the U.S. in that time? That's a very broad statement. The new work-related suicides, right? 16... United States. Okay, here we go. Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Suicide rates by industry and occupation. National Violent Death Reporting System. 32 states, 2016. Suicide among the U.S. working age population, ages 16 to 64 years, is increasing. In 2017, nearly 38,000 persons died by suicide. Let's collate that population. Japan versus United States. Yeah, proportionally, that's pretty high. I wasn't challenging that. I was curious.
Take his own life. The young engineer fell victim to the Japanese phenomenon of...
Oh, wait, hang on. Actually, hang on. One moment. I need to know... I'm not going to get into this tonight. I need to know, like, again, what means work-related. That's hard to discern, right? Like, work-related suicides. Do we know the mindsets of every single person who commits suicide just because they're working? I don't think that's true.
Or death from overwork. An early day for him was going home at 9 p.m., his father says. If work wasn't finished, he'd stay until midnight. Young women are just as vulnerable. This month, state broadcaster NHK revealed one of its reporters, 31-year-old Miwa Sado, had died from heart failure after working near 14-hour days.
I was reading that this Karoshi, that it started after World War II, and it was encouraged because they had to rebuild their economy, and so this industrious behavior, industrious nature was something that worked for them.
It's, Japan is, as many people know, my favorite country after France. I've lived there. It's a wonderful place, but that is part of the culture. It's not
probably something I should look out for, actually. I am doing, like, nonstop reading and research and planning in between streams. It takes a toll on you. I probably need to take it easier.
Not necessarily a boss that tells you have to stay and work overtime.
Right.
That country went from being essentially an agrarian society in 1850 to modernizing to the point where they were able to attack the United States less than 100 years later.
Mm-hmm.
Have you read that Japan has been reclaiming territory from Russia during this conflict? I assume you mean the Ukraine conflict? I have not. That's interesting. Hang on, let's see. Well, this is interesting. Thank you for this. Pulled up on the screen here. Actually, we'll, there, that's better. After Ukraine, Japan reverts to old line on After Ukraine, Japan reverts to old line on Russian-controlled islands. Shinzo Abe's nuanced language gone as outlook for negotiations dims. Wait. Where's the article? That's not an article, guys. It's a tweet. What the hell? Wait, what is this? Tokyo. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has produced a noticeable shift in Japan's diplomatic effort to reclaim Russian-controlled islands lost in the waning days of World War II. That's the whole fucking article? It's a sentence. What is this? What? There's nothing here. Okay, I'm not using that site anymore. Hang on, let me see if I can find another one. What the hell is that? Ugh. It's renewed the dispute. It hasn't made a successful bid to actually reclaim those territories. But that's interesting. I hadn't even thought of Japan in all this. I was only thinking of Japan in relation to China and Taiwan, not with respect to Russia. I mean, like, with respect to Russia, given what's going on in with Ukraine as sort of an indication of what kinds of things will be borne by the international community. What's interesting now since the pandemic is that we always work a little bit. There's no time in my schedule that's off work. For a couple of months, when I was on CERB, I saw that as like a golden opportunity that would never come again. Because by that point I had like CERB is the relief fund that was given to workers who couldn't work due to COVID, and we were freaked out. I was working as a house cleaner at the time, and I have like respiratory issues. Like you'll sometimes see me like my breathing will have difficulty on stream. When pollen hits, I'm dying. This is the time of year when I make emergency room trips, if I do, out of panic, just because like I can't breathe. So I went off for a little bit because I was having issues with that, and I was vulnerable as a result, because we work with like very fine misting cleaning chemicals like degreasers and whatnot that had given me severe issues. So on top of that, a respiratory illness of the severity that was being talked about at the time. Terrifying. So I went on CERB for a few months, and I used that time to just really power it with the channel, really boost the channel, really work really hard to get like to get video essays out, to work on equipment, to get streams down, to read, to just build myself to a point where I could do this semi-successfully. And as a result, like I've got my first desk job in my life, actually. Horrifically. But like it was not a break. Oh my god, it was not a break. Ever since COVID started, I don't think I've ever worked so constantly in my life. It's 24/7, and I love doing it. Like I love getting up dead tired and having to do this more than having to do anything else under those conditions. Like I'm blessed in a bizarre way right now. Like this is what people want to become PhDs to do, is to do research and to discuss things and explain things and have interesting conversations and to learn, while also making a living for it. There's something almost hermetic about it. And because of the levels of exploitation in the university, really perversely, people who manage to make a living doing this have more freedom to do that, which is really messed up. Because those people work their asses off, and they're actually teaching people, they're actually directly accountable. Like I hold myself accountable, but I don't have like somebody breathing down my neck telling me I have to do X, Y, and Z. If I am like months late on a video assignment, or like on a Patron video, people generally are pretty understanding about that, which I'm extraordinarily grateful for, because in no other industry would I be given that kind of leniency. I try to repay that patience with like quality, but you know, like I've felt it. It's been nonstop. God.
Everybody in Japan, whether you are the CEO or you're, delivering mail, is working, believes that work is part of what you're supposed to do.
And all that said, Japan's innovation and economic strength are, today, exemplary as a result of its culture. Its hyper-productivity and strong sense of national identity have created the world's third largest economy. And Miyazaki's lesson about clinging on to the past and the apocalyptic stagnation it brings is something we should all bear in mind when judging national policy in the modern world, ruled by technological innovation. And however harsh it may seem that Gilbert is punished with the loss of his humanity in his quest to extend his mortal life, and however harsh it may seem that a father is shoved off a bridge in his quest to extend his own son's mortal life, both punishments are justified in the eyes of Japanese history, because to cling onto the past and stagnate the natural course of fate is a far worse and apocalyptic crime. As the Buddha teaches, everything is changeable.
That's very essentialized. Like, I understand the logic here, but I don't think that's like a universal Japanese sentiment. I don't think it's necessarily Miyazaki's philosophy either, per se. It's an interesting idea, but I think he's overstating his case.
Everything appears and disappears. There is no blissful peace until one passes beyond the agony of life and even the agony of death. And just to emphasize, a decision that the Japanese government made hundreds of years ago and all the successive choices it made along the way, people today are still suffering the consequences of it. As in Sekiro, Genichiro literally sacrifices himself in order to summon his dead grandfather from out the grave, so that way his grandfather can kill a young lord and his shinobi protector. The older generation seeks to harm and destroy the younger. Or in Bloodborne, where a child is literally ripped out of his mother's womb to be harvested by older, immortal generations. Or in Derasene, where scientists sacrifice a child in order to correct their own errors. The child pays for the bad decisions of the older generation. It's a tale tragically parallel with the story of Japan.
I released a form of this map like a year and a half ago, and...
Nobody likes you. Be quiet. But anyways, that was interesting. There's something there sort of resonant with Machiavelli as well. Again, I think it's chapter 14 of The Prince. Let me double check. I've talked about this recently before. No, sorry, chapter 20. On fortresses. It's a often very much ignored chapter of The Prince. But it's the very last page. Considering all these matters, then, I shall praise both those princes who construct fortresses and those who do not, and I shall reproach any prince who, trusting in fortresses, considers the hatred of the people to be of little importance. That phrase there, trusting in fortresses. Very, very important. Orienting yourself around a fixed point and trying to maintain that fixed point, and not having a flexible and fluid capacity to respond to fortuna, in Machiavelli's language, dooms you. Because in all cases, like, what is the best thing? Well, it depends on the situation at all times. That's why it's better to be feared than to be loved if you must choose between the two. But to be loved by your people, and this is the part that people miss in Machiavelli, to be loved by your people is a better fortress than an actual fortress. You want to be loved and feared. If you must choose, you need to be feared. but you are in a much stronger place, even unarmed. Not unarmed in like that sense. Unsheltered by high walls. If your people love you, because your enemies will find your people undivided in defense of the principality, and you will have no need of hiding yourself from them. Do you believe the prince was written with the intention of poor instruction? No, not at all. Not at all. I think the prince was written with the intention of very good instruction, but very good instruction from a Republican mindset, where he really does recognize the site of political power as being within the citizenry, within the people of a place. So it's called The Prince, but it's a very Republican book. Because the advice isn't bad. The advice is very good. And it is directed to princes, but it's directed to princes to teach them that, well, they're complex goals, but among other things, for Italy to be strong and independent and to hold its own against the enemies abroad who have been encroaching upon them. They need to start thinking in terms of new modes and orders. The reason why Machiavelli gives rise to Hobbes, among other things, is that he starts to conceive of politics as being, and this is not an exhaustive statement of what politics is, but he starts to conceive of politics as being a kind of balancing of humors, where the people and chance and all sorts of like other forces have to be manipulated in such a way as to produce the best outcome, and everything is constantly in flow. It's not like in Aristotle, where like Aristotle's politics and ethics treat politics like a garden. Like the goal is to, the activity of politics is cultivating good citizens. That's not what Machiavelli is going to say at all. The good statesman is not. The good statesman is somebody who's, I mean, his language again is to court Fortuna. It's highly, famously sexist terminology, but the point is precisely against the notion of, again, that fixed point. You are whatever you need to be to prevail. And Machiavelli is not like a morally impoverished character in the sense that he's often characterized. He is deeply what we would call patriotic, and he esteems not just virtue in the sense of like the skill and the practical wisdom and all that stuff, and the judgment with which somebody kind of fences with reality or something, right? Like it's common with the language of a virtuoso. We think of somebody who like plays a musical instrument with like extreme skill. That's what virtue is, virtu without the E. But he doesn't downgrade virtue either. The point though is that that's not the essence of good political reasoning or judgment or action. Rigidly adhering to some notion of justice or whatever conduces to the death of your rule or to the death of your community or its independence or both. Again, like the fixed point, the fortress. You can't trust in fortresses. Don't trust in them. They can be used. They have their time and place, as everything does. But they have their time and place. You cannot just rely on your castle walls being the thing that saves you, the thing in which you stake all of your being. You need to be willing to you need to have the advantages of both the top of the mountain and at the bottom of the mountain, and you need to be able to switch between the two at will. You need to be able to be the fox and the lion. You need to be able to be virtuous and noble when it's required of you. You need to be willing to be vicious and depraved when it's required of you. All that stuff. There's a theory that because he wrote it from exile that he was intentionally giving who would be his oppressors advice that would ultimately lead to their destruction. No, I don't think so at all. I think he actually really did admire the people he said he admired, and I think he was actually giving advice that he thought was true. I don't buy that for a second. This is actually an eminently serious book. There's a satirical element to it, which is something that Rousseau picks up on, in that he is writing a manual for princes that is inherently Republican, and therefore, you know, in some sense, anti-principality as a political form. But this is an eminently very, very serious book. I would not take it as like I mean, first of all, there's no precedent for that. People don't just take bad advice and kill themselves as a general rule because somebody wrote a book in exile, right? Like people can tell when advice is bad. This advice is not bad. Very rigorous book. Anyways. If someone gives this book to you as a gift, does that mean anything in particular? Yes, it means they have excellent taste. Truly. One of the best books you can ever read. Machiavelli's The Prince. Better than Hobbes, in my opinion. You know what, it's actually, I'm realizing it's like, it's sold as like gift editions all the time too. It's like a novelty thing, like the Prince. You'll find a lot of, you know, actually surprisingly not cheaply bound, but like hard covers of like public domain translations of the Prince. I think it's William K. Marriott is typically what they do. It's a quick read too. The Prince is a quick read if you don't take it seriously. You should read it slowly. The Prince is something you can read again and again and again, and there are multiple dimensions to it. It's both shallower than it's sometimes treated, but it's also a lot deeper than it's treated. It's like the Tao Te Ching, I was going to say, in a lot of ways. But it has a lot of similarities to it. Okay, it's almost 2:30 a.m. I've got a Dune talk tomorrow, so I'm going to call it here. Thanks, everybody. Lovely chatting with you. And have a good night. I will see you tomorrow. I'll be talking with Brooks and Bunnytooth on Dune. The politics of Dune. Alright, take care, everyone.